Good morning and happy Mother's Day.
Good morning.
Hey. It's turned out to be sunny despite the threats of rain. Well, today's gospel picks up directly after last week's, which is kind of rare. And they're actually part of one long speech. So they are intertwined. We are in the midst of Jesus' farewell discourse, which is his last goodbye to his disciples on the eve of his death. And this is the last bit of instruction that he's going to give them while he's still alive. So briefly, last week, Jesus said that we are the branches on the vine, and the vine is Jesus. We should abide in him, meaning that we should have a relationship with him. If we don't abide in the vine, we will wither and die. But if we do, we will bear much fruit. So we can choose to detach ourselves from the vine, but God never chooses to let us go, because God chose us in love, but we have to accept that love. So there's the gist of last week's sermon for you. Continuing on. The first part is about abiding in God and God abiding in us, and us gathering strength from the vine so that we can bear fruit. But what is the fruit that we're supposed to bear? And that's what we hear about today. It's love. And to bear this fruit, we need to only do one thing, which is to follow Jesus' commandments. And he says commandments, plural, but he really only has one, which is that you love one another as I have loved you. Sounds pretty easy. It's not. Anyway, in order to be in a right relationship with God, we need to love one another. And if we do that, then we will bear more love in the world. And we will have Jesus' joy in us. If we just follow the so-called rules of church that people made up for our own sake without that love part, that's a very futile endeavor. Love is the key and gives us purpose in life to make our world better. That is the byproduct. And the byproduct of that is true joy. But what is joy? Is it the same as happiness? What's happiness? Well, the Declaration of Independence says that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And a lot of people kind of see this as a challenge, I think. That happiness is something we tend to chase after, that we try to find. But how do we know when we've found it? Because human beings are pretty bad at predicting what's going to make us happy. You know, I've said this a bunch of times. You're like, if I had a better job, I'd be happy. Or if I had a nicer apartment, a better boyfriend, the iPhone, whatever number we're up to now, then I would be really happy. But, as David Lowes writes, rather, perhaps happiness is the byproduct of worthy activities. Perhaps happiness is the feeling you get from a job well done, or from achieving a goal, or from being honest and trustworthy, or from helping someone out. In that sense, happiness is less a commodity to be pursued and possessed than it is a byproduct of noble efforts, or simply a gift to be received. I think this is what Jesus is getting at today. If we keep the commandment to love, then we will get more love, and then we will have true joy. And it is really good to note that in ancient Greek, which is the original text of the Bible, the New Testament, the root word for joy and grace is the same. So we know that God's grace is given to us freely. That's guaranteed. So joy can also be given as well. Perhaps joy, then, is the feeling of God's grace upon us. That indescribable feeling of abundant love that only God can give. And sometimes we feel it very easily, but often it's hard to kind of find the joy in life, especially when the world is in turmoil, as it perpetually seems to be. Now remember that Jesus speaks these words about joy on the eve of his own death. He knows that soon the disciples are going to be crushed by his death and scattered and experience a total lack of joy. And Jesus knows that these words of joy need to be heard when you face joyless times. But Jesus is not saying here, don't ever feel sad, or you have to be happy all the time. That's ridiculous. That's not realistic, right? That's not life. We can have sad times, and we will. Everybody does. The key is to continue to act in love, to continue to draw strength from the vine, and eventually that joy will return. Maybe little by little, maybe all at once, but it will return if we continue to abide. So as I said last week, God never cuts us from the vine. That's us. That's human life and the world. We get disconnected, we get hurt, or we get pulled in so many directions by our lives that we kind of fall away. And that's our decision. People say often that they have chosen Jesus, like that song, I have decided to follow Jesus. Some people love that one, right? And that is a true thing that does happen in life. But before that happens, God chooses us. Jesus says today, you did not choose me, but I chose you. God chooses us, calls us by name, invites us into a life of love and joy. Now, isn't that a wonderful thought? God chooses us to spread God's love in the world. And in the end, we have to decide what we want to do. We can't fix the whole world. That's impossible. That's up to God. God chose us to make our section of the world a better place to be. We need to follow Jesus' command to love. Then we will receive more love and more joy than we could ever get without him. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.